Hari Om, good evening. I am so thrilled to see you. Shardananda, Hamsananda, Joni, Evelyn, Molly. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Alexa. Let's do a little bit of chanting. Just take a moment to center, to quiet, to lengthen the spine. Let's chant Om and then that most precious of all names, Satchidananda Guru. Please inhale deeply for Om. 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 Satchidananda Guru Satchidananda, 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 Satchidananda. Jai Sri Sakuru Maharaj Ki Jai. Om Shanti. Om Shanti. Tonight, I'll tell you stories about Swami Satchidananda. Om Shanti. As each new person comes in, special greeting to you. Let's start at the beginning. I first came to integral yoga classes. I was fresh out of college. It so happened that I moved into a flat in which there were 5 women. One of them was an integral yoga teacher. So I went to take a class, and it was like the light had turned on. One class, and I was hooked. And I knew this is what I would spend the rest of my life devoted to. I was right. But I had absolutely no interest in a guru. And when Swami Satchidananda came to town, this is San Francisco, 1969 or 1970, and my teachers, my yoga teachers would say, our guru is coming to town, please come. I would say, thank you, I'm busy that night. Finally, somebody caught me and said, really, Divyananda, only my name was not Divyananda. He said, really? You should come. And his eyes were blazing. And I looked at him. I said, okay, I'll go. But do you know, I was a tough case. So I went and sat in the back of the room, and I thought, he's really beautiful, but he's not for me. Yes, that's what I thought. I was fresh from college, and to me, the great man uses long sentences and speaks of things which I can't really understand. Swamiji was very simple, very wholesome. He talked about nursing mothers and good diet. And I thought, yeah, not for me. But when I went home that day, I lived on the third floor of a building, and I ran up all 3 flights of steps. I paused on the top landing. I looked down 3 flights of steps, and I thought, where did all that energy come from? Must be that guru. Okay, and that was it. That was my first moment of discipleship, and there was no turning back. That somehow opened the door. I saw he had reached me not through my mind, but he had reached something beyond the mind and lit it up. So I went to see him again and again and again. That was San Francisco. Now, during that time, Swamiji was 4 years in America. He was about 60 years old. He was at the height of his powers. He was gorgeous, black curling hair, flashing eyes, lovely beard, this elegant way of moving. He was always graceful, slender, tall frame. And whenever he spoke a public speech, it was a capacity audience. He gave retreats, and usually there would be 500 people, most of us about 25 years old, and so eager to learn. So I went on the retreat, and actually my check bounced. I was kind of a mess. Yes, not kind of. We can take out that word kind of. I couldn't even keep my bank account straight. But anyway, I got to the retreat on a bounce check. And it was maybe 5 days of silence. It was at a kids' camp called Camp Kennerland in Santa Cruz. So it was very rustic, very simple. And during those 5 days, I had several experiences. So it was a kids' camp with no proper auditorium. So Swamiji spoke on an outdoor stage with us assembled in front of him. I remember sitting in the audience, listening to him, absorbing every word I could, and thinking, this man is not a human being. Yes, that's what I thought. The sequence of his thoughts, the energy that flowed continuously through him. Because again, these were the early days. And he was happy to speak for 3 or 4 hours. Out of consideration for us, he would stop 3 hours. But he obviously had plenty of energy, but we would sag, so he would stop. Then as we got older, he never spoke for more than it went down, 1.5 hours, and then finally like 45 minutes. But I think that was mostly a reflection of what he saw in our faces. So there I sat watching him and watching the sequence of thoughts. And it was obvious that the involvement of ego wasn't there. The self-consciousness that we all have was absent. And it was shocking. And when that satsang was over, I went out into the woods, deep into the woods, and I sat down and I cried for hours because I actually think my nervous system had to rewire itself to accept the possibility of divinity in human form, divinity on planet Earth. There were many sessions of tears. That wasn't the only one, but that was notable to see him in his magnificence. Recognize that there was something beyond the human at work. Such a powerful thing, such a very powerful thing. At that retreat, I also took mantra initiation. Again, huge numbers. My group was 70 people. At the end of the retreat, Swamiji had the habit of giving everybody prasad. And traditionally, we would line up and come up one by one to receive it from him. But no, he enjoyed throwing it. And he did this for years, actually. He would get those candies, those wrapped candies. I see Balaram nodding his head. Yeah, we've all seen this. He would throw the wrapped candies. And his aim wasn't that terrific, by the way. So sometimes we had to really leap to catch our candy. Or if it was a fruit, whatever. It was just really fun. But on this particular day, so you imagine indoor setting, this old kids camp, Swamiji up there throwing apples to us. Well, the windows in the back, they were the kind of windows where you have like 20 panes in one window. Well, you already know what happened. He broke a pane of glass. Yep. His aim was bad. The apple went right through the window. So, oh my God, our guru, initiation day, the embodiment of perfection, just broke a window. Do you know what? He laughed harder than anybody. He was going like this, uh-oh. And there's more to the story. There we were, seated inside, blissful, just initiated, with our guru, receiving our prasadam. Outside, 3 people were walking down the pathway. One of them was thinking, poor me, oh, poor me. They're in there with my guru, and here I'm out here and I have to work. Poor me. And as she's thinking that, an apple comes bursting through the window and rolls to her feet. How do you like that? So around Swamiji, it was always synchronicity, the right thing at the right moment and against all expectations. We adored him. We yearned for his attention. When he came into satsang, usually we would create a corridor and we would stand in line just hoping he might glance at us or maybe even stop and share a word. It took me years to understand that it wasn't the person that he loved. Because, yes, I have to explain. To glance at his eyes was to see the most enormous love flowing out of him. Okay? That moment of contact left us so happy for days. It could be 5 seconds of contact, and yet we would be happy for days. It was that powerful. Many years before I realized it wasn't us he was in love with. He was in love with the spirit riding around inside of us. He could see right through the personality or the body, and he saw the soul riding inside, and he was fully in love with that soul and celebrated it in each of us. And it was an extraordinary thing because his love made us love ourselves as very flawed people and made us believe enough in ourselves that we would strive very hard to follow the discipline and bring that light forth, to be all that he seemed to love. So these were days before the airports didn't have a lot of security. And many of our interactions with Swamiji were at the airports. Sananda Shardananda would remember so many hours waiting for him or sitting with him, waiting for the boarding call. And there's one particular day when he had handed me his travel bag. So it's just a small purse like this. And when the boarding call came, he came over and while I held it, he unzipped it and took his ticket out. But by chance, we both were leaning over the purse and our heads came just a few inches apart. Somehow, I got into a consciousness that wasn't mine. It wasn't mine. And this is what I saw. 1, the airport disappeared. Swami Satchidananda disappeared. Swami Divyananda disappeared. But what appeared is the exquisite beauty of a zipper. Yes, who knew? The teeth of the zipper were like ballet. Perfect synchronicity as they separated and came together again. It was so exquisite, like nothing else existed in the world but the beauty of a zipper. And then this brown hand reached in and removed the boarding pass. And then he stood up and it was gone. Maybe it was 30 seconds. I don't know, but I've never forgotten. And to me, that explained why he was in love with life, in love with silly us, and full of vitality. He saw the beauty in things. And he had that capacity. We've read it in every yoga book, but somehow he has the capacity of complete focus, which causes the hidden sacred to become visible. It was a few seconds, but wow, what a lesson. So there he was, walking around, looking like a human being, mixing with thousands of people, but living in a different consciousness, a divine consciousness. As he went, he spread seeds, the teachings. And I'm going to share with you some of the teachings that I got 40 years ago, 1980, more or less. I'm still working on them. Okay? The full teaching is there, and I'm still trying to unpack it, understand it, apply it. So this is the first one. This was San Francisco, 1980. I said, Swamiji, when I do Hatha yoga in the evening, I become very lazy. And that evening, I won't get any work done at all. So I shouldn't do evening Hatha, should I? You know what he said? He said, work done under tension is basically useless. Got that one? Work done under tension or while tense is basically useless. Okay? With that, he canceled like 40, 50 years of my efforts because I always have a certain amount of tension. But what a phenomenal teaching to be able to do our service, express our talents, whatever it is, in a way that's easeful, without a sense of burden or tension about it. What an extraordinary idea. So here we are, 40 years later, I'm still working with that motto. Every day I work with that motto. That's one. Yes, and this goes right along with it. I have a great tendency to overwork. And there was one time I was going into Shivananda Hall here at Yogaville. He was coming out. He was with his secretary, Premanjali. And she looked at me, very exhausted looking. And she turned to Gurudev and she said, Divyananda is burnt out. Now, I was working for the ashram, and I kind of expected a pat on the shoulder. I thought, yes, she's a very dedicated student. I thought I would get something like that. No. He shook his head at me, scowled at me, and said, your conscience should tell you when you've done enough. Okay? It's a simple teaching, isn't it? Your conscience should tell you when you've done enough. So I'm still working with that one too. Those two go together. Here's another. This takes a longer story. So I was in India. And I was working at the center there. And it was 11 years. And Swamiji had taken a lot of personal care in guiding me, going there. And then each year that I came back to America, he took some time to talk with me personally. And this particular year, I don't know if it was the third year, fourth year, I was crying a lot. So he had called me to his home. Those who know it was a Nandi Kutir. And I have absolutely no idea what I was complaining about, that I had this problem and that problem and this problem and that problem. And he just listened. He just listened. He didn't frown. He didn't smile. He just listened. He was very, very patient. And then he said, it's time for lunch. And he dined at his secretary's facility, which was 50 or 100 yards distance. And he would ride a golf cart back and forth. So we climbed in the golf cart together. And for a moment before leaving, we looked around. The wind had kicked up. And the nearest tree, it was kind of a phenomenon. It's like the wind came from under and all the leaves were upside down, belly up. Can you imagine? Sometimes if the wind is coming from under, you see the underside of the leaves. And both of us were looking surprised. And then Swamiji said, sorry, we had to end that meeting. Now we're starting up again. Hi, Shardanan.
We didn't miss anything.
Oh, Mom. Okay, so we're sitting in the golf cart. This wind is blowing in an odd direction. The leaves are belly up. And Swamiji turns to me casually and said, this is because of you. And I just say, yes, Swamiji, which is what I always said, whether I understood or not. Little by little, click, 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 my brain sorted it out. It was maybe 20 minutes later, we were sitting and eating. Swamiji normally ate in silence. But I turned to him, I said, do you mean, Swamiji, that when we're disturbed, it upsets nature? And he said, be quiet and eat your lunch. But Swamiji had the absolute capacity to put words in our mind. And I'm going to give you several examples of that. So when he said, be quiet and eat your lunch, what I heard was, well, of course, that's how it works. And that is a teaching which I continue to work with every day. When I'm disturbed, it affects all the events around me. If I'm seeing a lot of disturbance around me, I look inside and see if I find a place that needs to be quieted, calmed, and soothed. Not that I'm very successful at this, don't get the wrong idea. But he gave me a very important, very basic teaching right here. I'm going to give you two more examples of putting words into our minds. So I came to him as a young woman. I had a lot of problem with attractions. And I would call Swamiji. I said, Swamiji, I've fallen in love again. What shall I do? Yes, it happened so often. At one point he shouted, so how many times am I going to hear this from you? And another time he said, you're going to have this problem until you're 93 years old. Actually, he said, you're going to have this problem for 60 more years. You're going to have to learn to handle it. So when I added, I would be 93. I'm not sure that was an accurate calculation. Anyway, one time I had called him, Swamiji, I'm in trouble again. He said to me, who loves you the most? And I knew the answer. And it was not something I would have come up with. I said, God loves me the most. And he said, yes, devote yourself to God. I'm convinced that he made me say the words to help me believe in the words. What's another example? When he left his body, so he left his body 19 or 20 years ago. It's 19, I think, 2002. Yeah, 19 years ago. And the year prior to leaving, he was quite open with the senior disciples, saying, this will be my last year in the body. And that year, when I come back from India, he turned at one point and said to me, I will not be coming to India this winter. And every year he had been coming in November or December. Every single year. It was leaving the snow in Virginia and going to very nice weather in India. And when he said that, I heard in my mind the rest of the sentence, because I will no longer be in my body. So many times, the teaching was implanted in the mind without his words. I never saw Swamiji yawn. I traveled with him, Rishikesh, Hawaii, Europe. I never saw him yawn. I never saw him eat unconsciously. If we went to him and said, Swamiji, what would you like for lunch today? He wouldn't answer right away. He would rub his belly and say, maybe lasagna would be nice today. He would think about it, consult his body, and then answer. Okay. I found him to be absolutely consistent in his dedication to us. What he did, what he said, how he moved, everything seemed to revolve around how are we going to benefit. It didn't deviate throughout the entire time I knew him. Yogis traditionally have cities, healing powers, or clairvoyance. He would claim that he didn't have any healing powers, but I'm going to give you an example, maybe a couple examples of things that magically happened around him. So during my time in India, my favorite place was a town called Tiruvannamalai. And this is the town where Ramana Maharshi has his ashram. In that town, there's an enormous temple. It's 24 acres with 9 different gateways leading into the sanctum. It's an extraordinary temple. And during my stay in India, I would take groups of Westerners to see some of the great spiritual centers, and we would always include Tiruvannamalai. Twice, I lost somebody going through that town. Not that they couldn't find their way, but twice somebody would come to me and say, just a moment, is everything okay?
Yeah,
okay.
It's just they're saying they can't see you.
Oh, I can't see me either. That's nice. It's okay, I'm going to keep on. So twice somebody on the tour would come and say, thank you, Divyananda. Yeah, hi, here I am. Om Shanti. They would say, I'm really loving the tour. Don't take this personally, but I'm going to stay in this town because the beauty of it and the spiritual energy of it. One was a young woman. And when she rejoined the tour 3 or 4 days later, she said, Divyananda, I'm having problems. She said, since I spent time in that temple, there's a vibration in me that won't stop. I have no control over it, okay? And I can't sleep. These are indications of the Kundalini being awakened. So I knew that right away, and I just said, look, we're going to see Swamiji this evening. Let's see if he can take care of it. He was just coming into the airport that evening. So we went as a group to see him. And when I introduced this young lady, I said, Swamiji, she needs a special blessing. Her Kundalini is active. And she went forward and bowed to him. And he just smiled. He tapped her on the shoulder. She never had another problem with it. That's not a small thing. That is not a small thing. Yeah. Let me see. When he was young, he was so full of energy. And there's something the gurus call Shaktipat. Do you know that word, Shaktipat? Shaktipat is a transference of spiritual energy. And the person at the receiving end has an upliftment and maybe ecstasy. Some gurus give Shaktipat daily to hundreds of students. Some gurus have really developed that, and it can be very powerful for an awakening of a new student. Swamiji declined to do it. He didn't want to show off his capacities, and the Shaktipat typically only lasted a few hours or maybe a few days. And he didn't want us to be attached to his person. He would say, I'm just a signpost. Don't make a fuss over the signpost. Read what it says and obey it. He would say it that way. But his being was so full of energy that it couldn't help but transmit. And I learned early on that if I angled my body, if it was full body, Swamiji standing, me standing, and I angled so it was full face, I would catch his Shaktipat. Yep. So I would position myself so that as he came out of an auditorium or got out of a car, I was exactly positioned so that when he was completely straight, facing in that direction, there I would be. And it was the most wonderful transference. I think he had no intention of it, but it just naturally happened. It flowed from him. There were also many times when I was his hostess or setting up programs for him. Yes, I would totally overwork. I was quite consistent in that. When I would go to receive him at the airport, yes, he would see this exhausted face, dragging herself through the movements. And then we would take him to rest wherever he was going, go home ourselves to rest. And during the night, I would be restored. I think he just would see my face and realize, oh my God, that we have to keep that woman on her feet for another 3 days until I leave the town. No kidding. It was the weirdest thing. I would go to bed completely depleted. I would wake up in the morning fresh and ready to roar. I think he just did it for the sake of the organization, so I could be there and fulfill my duty. He did have clairvoyance, and I'll tell you a couple of stories to illustrate that. In Los Angeles, he stayed for a few nights. I think it was 2 or 3 nights at the home of Carole King, the musician, who is his devotee. And I had helped to get it set up. I was there, and he was leaving to go with his uncle for sightseeing in Los Angeles. And as he before he got in the car, he was standing and chatting, and I was leaning against one of the cars. And I stood up and brushed my skirt off. An ordinary thing. But he saw me do that. And he said, oh, my disciples, they washed the car with their clothes. My silly disciples. I didn't get it. What? Why? I just brushed my skirt off. Why is he making a big thing about it? But this is what happened. It was a year later. We went to the airport, but we were late and we had not washed the car. Okay. We get to the airport and find out his flight is late. Okay. So I had time to go in the bathroom and I took off my undershirt, wet it. And I went back and I washed the side of the car that he would see. Okay, so it was just the passenger door. Can you imagine that? So yes, I washed the car with my clothes. So now we know why he was laughing at Carole King's house. Swamiji was, oh my God, he loved life. He was the example of somebody in love with life. He loved to go horseback riding. He loved to go surfing, of all things. He loved to be with people who could joke with him, okay? People who weren't so overwhelmed by him. that they were struck dumb. I was in that category. But there's some souls who would talk back and tease him, and he just enjoyed that so much. But I want to tell you some of the examples of his wit. It was Santa Barbara, and we were fundraising for the Lotus Shrine. And one of our members, her name is Kamala Stacy. I think many of you know her. Paul certainly does. She was an outstanding cook. And for the auction, she had offered to do a gourmet dinner for 8 people. And so the auctioneer was going through the description, but he got mixed up between my name and Dayananda's name. Okay? And he kept saying, Divyananda is going to cook this gourmet dinner. Now, at Carol King's house, this is linked. When Gurudev was staying there, I cooked his dinner. It was surely the worst dinner he's ever had. Because I still remember it with embarrassment. Oh my God. It was Indian food. I didn't know how to cook Indian food. Somebody had given me some recipes. I had no clue what I was doing. I'm sure it was the worst meal he had ever had. So here's this auctioneer announcing that Divyananda is doing a gourmet meal. Everybody's trying to signal him. No, it's not Divyananda, it's Dayananda. He doesn't get it. He doesn't get it. Finally, he catches himself and says, oh, I meant Dayananda, not Divyananda. But our guru leaned forward to his microphone and said, thank goodness, I was about to call the doctor. He couldn't resist. He just couldn't resist. He had a fondness for the old-time cars with the big fins, I think mostly Chrysler, or maybe Lincoln, but 1957, 1960, in that time, to remember the big fins. So we located some cars, and in the end, I think he purchased 3 and then resold them. But we had found one in Bolinas, California, and he gave a talk in Bolinas. So we figured after the talk, we'd go by and see it and see if he liked it well enough to consider buying it. So Rishi Shrai, one of our wonderful reverends, was driving. Myself and Dayananda were in the back seat. And when we got to the address, we could see the car, but nobody seemed to be home. So Rishi left the car and it was still running, but he said, let me go around the back and see if I can locate the owner. He was gone quite a while, and Gurudev was just quietly resting, waiting. And then the car started rolling, very slowly, but the car was rolling backwards down the driveway. Dayananda and I were, what's going on? And then it stopped and it started rolling forward up the driveway. Yes, this is true. And we looked carefully and saw that Gurudev was playing with the gear shift. Okay? But the funny thing is, when poor Rishi came around the house and saw the car rolling away, oh my God, his face changed color. But it could have been such a good joke, except Dayananda and I were laughing. And he saw our faces and he knew what was happening. But that was our Gurudev. In the front seat, he was completely straight-faced and he was enjoying tricking our dear Rishi. Hamsananda and I were both party to this one. Gurudev fired me 3 times during my stay in LA. Okay, it was 7 years. So I was director, fired. Year later, I was director again, fired. Somebody else led it for a year and I got fired again, whatever. And Hamsananda was one of the directors. And initially, it was a little struggle, subordinate, and then supervisor, subordinate. And word got to Gurudev that we were struggling. He called us up and said, "You're going to have to change the name of the Yoga Institute. It's Integral Un-Yoga Institute." He said, "Yoga means harmony. Yoga is peacefulness and accommodation. No, if you're fighting, it's Integral Un-Yoga Institute." So each year, through, I don't know how, but when it started, maybe from 78 to 88, we would host a 10-day silent retreat in Santa Barbara at La Casa de Maria. And it would attract 100 people, 120 people. It was very, very powerful. There are many in our organization whose spiritual life started during those 10-day retreats. And we had organized one of the retreats around an interfaith theme. And we brought a Catholic, Islamic, Jewish, Buddhist. So we had a series of celebrants representing their faiths. And we organized a lovely luncheon to include everybody together. And one of them was a little bit poking at Swamiji. He said, "Swamiji, how can you promote interfaith connectedness when you've never even read the Bible?" He was a Christian pastor. And we who were serving, we were so horrified. How can he say something like that to our guru? And Swamiji said, "Well, I know the author." That was his response. He wasn't bothered, went right on with his lunch. Just one more story. I think I blundered once a day. I had made so many mistakes. It's no wonder he kept firing me from my administrative positions. But at one point, I was driving him from LA to Santa Barbara. And as we were going along, I turned off the fan and the AC so he could easily hear me. And I said, "Oh, Swamiji, I really feel like I've let you down. I've made so many mistakes." And he went, I said, "What, you think you're holding me up somewhere and you let go and I'll fall down?" He said, "So why did you turn off the AC?" I said, "Well, Swamiji, so you could hear me." He said, "Put it back on." Finished. That's my guru. Okay. He left his body in 2002 in India. So I just told you a bit about how he let us know. He was very frank about it. This year, I'll be leaving my body. It's not that he said it on a public stage, but he talked pretty frankly with some of the senior members. And among them was his grandson. And for a traditional funeral service for a South Indian, certain things may need to be collected. So he had given his list to his grandson and said, "I want these available for my funeral this year." So, as I said, he normally came in November or December, but this year he came in August. And he came because he got an invitation to the World Conference for Peace. It was a big symposium. It was near Coimbatore, his home. And he accepted the invitation. He came in August instead of November. And initially, when we heard he was coming, we thought, oh, it's because he won't be in his body in December. But we forgot that. We completely forgot it. Because he arrived quite frisky and happy and talking about plans for the future. And in his company, sometimes you just get swept up by the energy. So, World Conference for Peace, it was an assembly of 6 or 8 very important speakers. And among them was somebody who worked in the CBI. CBI is the CIA of India. And he had apprehended an important terrorist and as a result had a price on his head. And the government provided him with security wherever he went. So there, we in the audience were looking at this assembly of great souls, this beautiful banner with doves and olive branches, World Conference on Peace. And then that was flanked by 2 armed soldiers, their rifles in hand. They were, they were the staff of the government, and they had the assignment to keep this man safe. So we're not looking at a guy relaxing. They were both on red alert, scanning the audience, ready to protect this man. It was their job. But to be in the audience, it was a disconnect. To see 2 men ready to shoot you, and hear this group of speakers talking about peace. We couldn't quite do it. Speaker after speaker spoke. And when we got to Swamiji, do you know, at this moment, I don't remember his words. I know I have them written somewhere, but I don't remember exactly how he put it. But he talked about the fact that violence is part of nature, okay? Death is part of the human experience, okay? We're here to be happy. And there's something in his voice, his presence, that the energy, it was like air out of a balloon. All the fear left the atmosphere. We were happy again. We were relaxed again, okay? And that conference went on about 3 days. He nurtured every soul that was there. He poured it out, okay? And then he came, that was a few hours travel from Coimbatore. So he came a few days later and he gave a lecture there. Now, our center in Coimbatore held as many as 200 people. And for some reason, when we announced his lecture, I asked people to sign up and make a reservation. And we quickly reached past 200. So I called my supervisor. I said, we've got to find another venue. And it's unbelievable. We found a venue on the same block. Yeah. It was the furthest corner of the block, but it was a bare 10 minutes walk from our center. So we hired that center, and the evening Swamiji spoke, 700 people came. Normally, it was 200 in India. And it was the most, I can't explain that evening. The sweet energy that was there, the preciousness of it. There were 1,000 blunders along the way, and yet it all wove into this beautiful tapestry. Swamiji spoke about leaving the body, although he didn't at that time say, I'm leaving the body. It was only, I believe, 5 days prior to his actual death. But it was very, very sweet. And so many people who remain devoted to him now saw him only that one time in that crowded auditorium. So during those few weeks that he spent in India, he went to a temple, which was the prominent temple in Coimbatore. And it's a temple where he himself had served as temple manager when he was a young man, I think at the age of 20, 22. And he had a great fondness for one image in that temple. It was an image of Lord Nataraj, the dancing form of Lord Shiva. And as a young man, when the temple closed in the evening, Swamiji would go to the temple safe, remove the jewels, and go decorate Lord Nataraj and do worship to him. You can imagine. So he had a very special feeling and devotion toward this image. And one of the times we had visited here, he turned to me as we were doing our worship, or hopefully it was right after, and he said, he's the one who sent me to America. So he felt decisions in his lifetime came from that entity, that deity. So here we were, a small group, maybe 6 people, who arrived to that temple. It's called Peru Temple. And we had only gotten word that he was going there maybe 40 minutes ahead of time. He was staying at he was hosted at another home. But somebody had called and said, Gurudeva's going to Peru Temple. If you're quick, you can get there. And we were extremely quick. And in India, when you enter a temple, if it's a big temple, they have an elephant there. And the elephant is part of the temple staff. The elephant will be stabled maybe a mile away or wherever there's appropriate space, but he'll serve there in the temple for certain daily hours, and he blesses the devotees who request it. How does the elephant do the blessing? With his trunk, he taps the top of your head. So you come to the elephant and you bow a bit, and he just puts his trunk there for a moment, and then you give him a coin. Okay, if this is the trunk of an elephant, the coin will sit right there with the wrist. He just curls his trunk a little, and he can hold maybe 100 coins there. And when that area is full, he gives it to his keeper, the mahout. So when Swamiji came in, he went to receive the blessing. The elephant didn't remove her trunk. Swamiji had to walk out from under it. And I tend to believe the elephant, the wisdom of the elephant, knew it would be his last visit. And with us was a woman, some of you know Mr. Parmeshwaran, his wife, Malati, sings the traditional Tamil devotional songs. And she's exquisite. Her voice is exquisite, and she brings from her heart such a beautiful devotion. Somehow we had gotten her there at that time. And at every shrine, a South Indian temple will usually have maybe 10 sub-shrines before you reach the sanctum. So at every shrine, she chanted the devotional chant, traditional for that part of India, traditional for that deity. It was something absolutely exquisite. And then having circled, having gone into the sanctum before leaving, Swamiji sat in front of the image of Nataraj and almost vanished into his meditation. He was absolutely still, maybe 15 minutes. And I think that was his goodbye to planet Earth. I think he's still here also, but for his bodily form. So I think he knew, the elephant knew, we were the silly people, so easy to dupe. And he gave his talk on Tuesday night. That was the talk for which 700 people came. On Wednesday, he left to go to Chennai or Madras. And he left because there's a movie star in India named Rajnikant. Very, very, very famous. He's the Elvis Presley. He's the Tom Cruise. And he's been a star, I think, for 40 years. He started as a young man. They just dye his hair and use some makeup. He's still playing the parts of young men. But it was the opening night for his movie. He was very devoted to Buddha. So on that night, he announced, "This is my guru." And both of them got photographed and photographed and photographed. And that night, it wasn't, well, he was on stage, but that night Swamiji fainted. And so his attendants took him to the doctor. Doctor says, yeah, he's sick, but he's okay. Just make him rest. And I wasn't there that evening for the opening of the movie, but and I was in another city then. But somebody called a few days later and they said, Divyananda, Swamiji's pretty sick. So in the middle of my duties, I left and went to see him. And he was resting. It was everybody said, oh, he's just got a respiratory infection. He's just sick. He needs to rest for a couple of days. And the doctor kept saying, his flight back to America is on Monday. He will be okay to fly, but just keep him resting for a while. So I spent a day and a half there. And you know what my job was? Getting clippings from the newspaper and magazines. In the last week of his life, Swami Satchidananda was famous in India. He was famous in America, but in India, when he was there that month or two every year, he kept a low profile. It was a little bit of a rest time for him. He didn't have to perform for the public, so to speak. And he wasn't well known. That's why just 200, one time 700 would show up for his lectures. Until that Wednesday night movie opening, every newspaper, every magazine had his picture, not just that week, but the next week too. And now when I'm in India and people say, who's your guru? Say, it's Rajnikant's guru. Then they know right away, oh yeah, that's it. So I could tell many details about that period of time, but I'll just pick out a couple of things that I'd like to share. One is his last words to me. I went to him, I said, Swamiji, I really have to go back to the Institute. I just rushed to come here, but I need to go on back now. And he said, go on back. You have a lot of work to do. Okay? My fear is that the moment I leave the body, I'm in spirit form. And of course, the first person I'll meet is Swamiji. What's he going to say to me? Go on back. You have a lot of work to do. Yep. That's my guess. But again, the mystery of how these things work. As I said goodbye, I took his hand and I held on to it for an awfully long time. And I wouldn't normally do that. I try to, just observe proprieties. But my body knew what my mind didn't know. My body knew, and my hands knew. And I just held on until finally it would be really embarrassing to keep holding. So I had a train to catch that night. It was like almost impossible to get to the train station. The valet didn't bring our car. The traffic was blocked. Okay, I didn't have time to get back to my hotel. Okay, I had to catch the train at the last minute and send somebody else to gather my things in the hotel room. It's like nature herself was trying to say, don't go. I'm dense. I left. But the next day, we got a call. Swamiji's worse. In Coimbatore, our center was comprised, our members and volunteers are mostly Indians between college and marriage. Okay, that's when they have discretionary time. Okay, so we're looking at 23, 25-year-olds. And they sat down, they said, we're going to chant Triambakam. Maybe 10 young men and this old lady, we chanted 1 hour in full volume. And when I got up, I thought, he is cured. Are you kidding? 10 young Indian men, 25-year-olds, focused on this, my guru's going to be fine. But one of them, before leaving, he said, Divyananda, we have to do a Triambakam Homa. Okay, a Homa is an elaborate ceremony, 2 hours, 3 hours of length. And I didn't, it's a lot to put together a homa, to get the priest to come, to have the money to pay him, to get all the supplies needed, to call the devotees and inform them. I said, if you can pull it off, nothing better, but you're going to have to handle it yourself. And this was a young man. I didn't think he'd be able to do it, but he did. 5 o'clock in the morning, the priests were there. By 5:30, the homa had begun. Triambakam Homa means dedicated to a human soul, dedicated for the well-being of that soul. And it means all the rituals are focused around the healing, the health, the well-being of that soul, Swami Satchidananda ji. And it was maybe 40 minutes into that home that a call came. And when I went out and answered, it was the message, Swamiji's left his body. Swamiji, he had the ability to reach us, and he made sure I didn't collapse. So I just went back to the home and I informed the priest, well, the one you're praying for has left his body. Does that change the ritual? No, it doesn't change the ritual. Stayed through the home. And when I returned to the reception area, our friends had come. They had gotten the news. They were just there to console or how can I help? And Swamiji kept me in my trance. The grief didn't really come into my heart for, I think, maybe 4 days, a few days. So somehow a bunch of us got on a plane, flew to Chennai, paid our respects to Gurudev's body. The hospital had put aside a room for us to come and view him and say our goodbyes. And then I don't know if it was that evening or the following evening, a few of us, maybe 7, flew to America with the body. And it was pure chance. I had asked a friend, you're going to have to get me a ticket to Washington. You're going to have to, try this person or that person to borrow the money to pay for the ticket. He just did it. And by chance, that ticket was on the same flight as Gurudev's body. All these things are the magic of a great saint. And there's no way I can do a proper tribute to him, his effect on this planet, and his effect on this soul. When I was invited to give this talk, the organizers asked me to come up with a title, and I picked Stranger in Paradise. Do you remember that song? The Elders Among You. And so I looked up the lyrics. I didn't quite know how I was going to link Stranger in Paradise to this sharing, but the lyrics really are appropriate. Take my hand, I'm a stranger in paradise. For mortals who stand beside an angel like you and see your face, I ascend out of the commonplace into the rarest somewhere in space. Open your angel's arms to the stranger in paradise and tell him that he need be a stranger no more. Sri Swami Satchidananda Ji Maharaj, great soul, brilliant soul. I'm so blessed to have known him in the flesh and to continue to have his grace and protection at this time. I'm so happy you've come to share and hear the stories. And I pray that you stay aware of the divine presence. It may not be in the form that I knew him, Swami Satchidananda, but the divine is always around us and longs to serve us. And it's only for us to open ourselves and be willing to receive that our life can be transformed. let's spend a couple of minutes in silence and find that sacred energy in your own heart. Chanting Om one time, inhale deeply. Om. Om. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. May the entire universe be filled with peace and joy, love and light. May the light of truth overcome all darkness. Victory to that light. Jai Sri Sakuru Maharaj Ki. Jai. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. This program continues next week. Hamsananda will join me. We were together we were together over and over. San Francisco and LA and Yogaville. We've been a magic team. I mean, it's magic for me to be teamed with her. So we'll be sharing again, same time, and hope some of you can join us again. Thank you. Love to you. Om Shanti, Om Shanti. Thank you.